Hello, my name is Vincent Tovar, Associate Executive Director of MASBA, the Mexican American School Boards Association. This year, we're celebrating our Golden Jubilee, 50 years of closing gaps in our Texas public schools. Thank you for joining us as we present the top COVID-19 legal issues for the 2020-2021 school year. This is exciting. We're excited to have experts share their knowledge and expertise with us at such an important time. It's my pleasure to introduce our two special guests. Elizabeth Neely focuses her legal practice on assisting school districts with employment, civil rights, contracts, student and liability issues, as well as offering training for board members, administrators, and staff. Having practiced law in the Rio Grande Valley for many years, Elizabeth opened the Wash Gallegos McAllen office. She now practices in San Antonio, continuing to represent school districts throughout South Texas. Unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, our next speaker is not with us, but hopefully he will join us momentarily. Tony Resendez represents school districts all over the state of Texas with an emphasis on board governance, employment matters, and general school law issues. Tony has assisted districts with superintendent searches, construction litigation matters, and served as co-bond counsel for several districts. He has experience in the areas of general corporate law, Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and general civil litigation. Welcome, Elizabeth, and hopefully soon, Tony. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure for us to be here. I will tell you that in one of the joys, and when I use the term joy loosely, of practicing during COVID is that we're working remotely, and so we have all sorts of issues. And I've told people that I feel like I am back in law school. I have had to learn so many new things, and the laws change daily, and I feel like I have professors giving me surprises all the time, and so it has been a very interesting time. And so having said that, that's why Tony's not on the line right now, because he can't get on the line. He tried by phone, he tried by computer, and he's having issues, so he's having technical difficulties. Hopefully he will join us soon. So in the meantime, what I want to talk to y'all about is some of the legal issues that we've had, not just for this past year, but really more what preview of coming attractions. And I know that working with your superintendents throughout Texas, they are just struggling to figure out what's next. What is 2021 going to look like? What are some of the things that we as a board need to focus our attention on? And so we come up with some of the topics that we feel like are items that the board really needs to focus in on, and working with your administration, and needs to be at the top of your attention. So one of the first things that we'll talk about is the Open Meetings Act.
Hello, can you see me? Hello, can you hear me?
We can, Tony, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, so I was just telling the board that, and I can't actually see you because I've got control of the screen, but I'll go through you just let me know when you're ready to go to the next slide, or I can turn it over to you when you're ready if you want to change presenters. It's up to you.
Okay, I apologize for being late. I apologize for being late. I'm having some computer issues, but as Elizabeth, if you have control of it, that's fine. We'll just get started on the Texas Open Meetings Act. And again, welcome everyone. And I did hear Elizabeth mention that, we have to learn new things when new things come up. And this is a time where it's been challenging for a lot of districts, just trying to figure out what to do and where to go. And I know a lot of districts recently have just finished graduation, so that's a big deal, getting that closure. And so we thought, since the timing of the year, maybe we'll give you a reminder of some of the things to think about and to keep on your mind as you move forward in preparation for the summer and the next year. Elizabeth, can you still hear me okay?
Yes, I can still hear you. I am going to mute myself when I'm not talking, because Vincent said that there was some feedback. So yes.
Okay, good. I did hear a little feedback. Okay. And again, Elizabeth may have some points while I do this part of the presentation, and I may check with her, because we just want to make sure we give you guys some practical, useful tips on how to proceed during this interesting time. So, okay. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide on the Open Meetings Act. As you guys know, the governor, in an effort, the whole idea of suspending, and you all probably know this, to suspend some of these rules was to allow districts to do business, but at the same time be sensitive to trying to stop the spread or slow the spread, rather, slow the spread of the coronavirus. And obviously that's been a challenge, but the idea was that can we suspend some of these rules to allow districts to continue to do business, but at the same time to be safe. And then also the second part of this main premise is we still want to be transparent to the extent that we're able to share information, allow the community to be involved, to allow the boards to move forward, so that there are some rules that weren't suspended that are still required. So let's talk about the first little bullet point there. No longer requiring a quorum or presiding officer to physically be present at a specified location of the meeting. So in the past, you had to have a quorum all present at the same location, at least 4 board members for most districts. There's a few districts that have 9 board members, and I know one district actually has 3. But at the end of the day, the law required you to have a quorum. Now, physically present at the meeting. Now you don't have to do that with these suspended rules. As long as you have, though, a quorum, whether video, telephone conference, or in person, a combination, you do still have to have a quorum participating in the meeting, but not physically present at the meeting. The second little bullet point there is notice of meetings no longer must be physically posted. So again, this is one of those in an effort. If you're going to have an online meeting, video conference or telephone conference, you do have to post, but you got to do it online, not physically present at the building itself. So that was another effort to try to keep people from having to go and go to the district and post things. So the next little bullet, telephonic or video conference meetings do not have to be audible to members of the public physically present at the meeting. If they're physically present at the meeting, they're physically present at the meeting and they could see and hear. You don't have to provide additional audio or video cameras or speakers to allow them to hear that way. If they're present, they're present. The next bullet, basically any statute, there's several statutes that require face-to-face meetings. And again, the governor suspended some of these with an effort to keep people from having to interact, but at the same time allowing them to do meetings and get district business done. And I'm sure probably most of the districts I've worked with, and I'm sure Elizabeth as well, they've all been having these video conference meetings or telephone conference meetings. And there have been glitches like there was today with me. So be patient with everyone. I was at a meeting last night and it was the first time that they didn't have a glitch or an issue. And, you know, they were all patient with each other and they just kind of hung in there. So be prepared and be patient with your administration and the technology, because sometimes there are glitches that happen. So, okay, Elizabeth, next page. Okay, so as I mentioned, there are, however, a number of Open Meetings Act requirements that are still in place. So even though the governor is trying to give you guys or give us some flexibility with how we're going to do business, there's some things that still need to be done to maintain that transparency and to maintain that order and making sure certain things are followed. One of those is written notice before a telephone conference or video conference meeting still has to be provided. So you have to still post online. Every district that has a website is supposed to post it normally at their administration building where they post it or online. So if you're having these meetings, telephone conference or video conference, it's just making sure you post it online. And then you also have to have a recording of the meeting. You know, you still have your minutes and you still should post those to make it transparent with your agendas, and that's always a good practice. But now it's the added addition of making sure that there's a recording of the meeting after the meeting itself. The next bullet, the public must still be able to participate to address the governing body. So some districts have, or a lot of districts are allowing public comments to come in through email before the meetings, or even at the meetings. They're setting aside some time for community members to call in or video conference in and comment. That's important. It's important to go through that extra step of making sure your community is involved or has the option to be involved. And that's a big part of what the governor's pushing in terms of transparency and making sure that things are done in those orders. So the next bullet, accordingly, the notice must be, as I mentioned, you have to include a toll-free number or a video conference link to allow the community to participate. And all the districts I've so far have been at, it's worked pretty well. They have folks calling in or online through the link, participating or listening, sometimes commenting when appropriate. So that's worked out well. And then again, a quorum of the governing body must still be participating in the meeting. They don't have to all be at the same place, but they need to be participating. And that's important to maintain that quorum, to make sure that you're able to legally get district business done by making sure a quorum of the elected officials of your district are participating and making decisions. Why don't let me ask Elizabeth, before we get to the big takeaways, Elizabeth, or go ahead, we could leave it right there. Are there any additional thoughts or comments on those two pages?
I think there's been some questions about, well, what does this look like in the coming year? And so I think we have to monitor as the governor opens up the state, and how is that going to change? First of all, we have to wait and see if the Attorney General rules or the governor rules that these don't apply anymore. But there's been some questions about whether or not this is going to carry over into this next school year. We don't know the answer to that question. I kind of suspect that it is, just because of the health risks that are still associated with COVID and aren't expected to, they're expected to flow in the coming year. So I kind of think we will be able to take this through to the coming year, but you have to be, and that kind of goes with what this big takeaway is that's on the slide that we're talking about right now, and I'll let you talk about that, Tony.
Okay.
Well, if I could interrupt, we do have a question from the audience, which is similar to what you guys are addressing of, there are knowns and unknowns. And the question specifically is, do we know how long the OMA rules will be relaxed to accommodate virtual meetings?
So as Elizabeth mentioned, there hasn't been any specific clear indication from the governor's office or the attorney general yet. The initial order that was signed back in, or the advisory that was signed from the governor back in March, the very end, it talks about that these rules will remain in place until they make a determination. The governor makes a determination that we're past this social distancing requirement, past this public health concern. So I anticipate that, as Elizabeth mentioned, that these rules will remain in effect. And I think what we're finding is there's some districts that things are going pretty smoothly and they're continuing to do the video conference, and some of them like that, and business is getting done. And I think that feedback is getting back to the governor's office. And I also know that with the rules being relaxed, there have been some districts that have met in person. I was at a meeting last night where they did meet in person, but they made sure everybody was at least 6 to 10 feet apart and people wearing masks at that particular district, and the meeting ran fine. So I don't think there's a real end in sight until I believe it sounds like until the numbers really go down, or until there is a vaccine or some medication or something that's able to really control the spread of it. So until that they're able to do that, I anticipate that we'll continue to have these rules in place for now. But
I would say that if we are going to see a change, it's going to be because the public complains that they're not being given access to redress the board. In other words, because they don't feel like they are being able to make comments during public comments that is in an effective manner. And so that's one of the areas that, we get the governor's attention, we get the attorney general's attention. If you have, public complaints that we are not able to access our elected officials.
Yeah, that's why it is important to go the extra mile to make sure that the public is participating through, whether they're commenting through emails before board meetings, or making sure that they, are connected through the links or the telephone toll-free number. But in the meantime, it's kind of a process that we have to continue and to keep following that. And, we'll just have to be flexible and see what the governor ultimately does. But I think we'll know more probably in the next month or two as the state is opening up, and as we get more guidance from the governor. But okay, I'll let Elizabeth go on to the next slide.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about employment considerations. There are a lot of considerations that are coming up, and one of the things that we have is we have guidance from the Texas Education Agency, the Texas Commissioner, Education Commissioner, and he has indicated that it's their recommendation that districts be as flexible as possible when it comes to student instruction. And of course, student instruction should be the focus of every school district, is how are we going to ensure that our kids are educated when we may have additional outbreaks or time periods of quarantine. And so one of the suggestions has been to start school earlier, to go to year-round schools, things like that. And we're going to talk about those in detail, as well as other issues that have come up with your employees and that will continue to come up with your employees in the coming year. One of the suggestions that we have made is, most people adopt their academic calendar for the next school year, in January or even earlier than that. Some people do 2 years of adoption of academic calendars. Your work calendars are a little bit different because there's more flexibility with regard to duty days for your employees. And so one of the things that we had recommended to districts earlier was that, for our clients, is that their contracts no longer say months in them, so that we can have a little bit more flexibility as to what those duty days would be. But one of the things that you want to ensure, and when speaking with your with administration, is that the calendars for next year have some wiggle room for responding to COVID-19. The language needs to be in there about that this is subject to change due to the year, based on possible school closures, based on the instructional needs of students, so that you've got more flexibility to be able to make those revisions. And it's better to do that now than when the employee's resignation date is in effect, and to limit grievances and complaints. The Texas Commissioner of Education has said that for contractual employees, we have to give written notice of any change in salary or any change such as duty days that might affect salary 45 days before the first day of instruction, in order to allow the employee to resign without penalty. So an employee can resign at the end of a school year, or they can resign 45 days before the first day of instruction during the summer without penalty. And at that point, the district has to accept that resignation, and you can't go to the commissioner later and say this person abandoned their contract. And so that's why we're recommending also that if you're going to adjust work calendars, that you do it 45 days before the first day of instruction, so that if the employee says, hey, you know what, I'm not going to work for this district, if they're going to have that kind of wiggle room in their calendar, they have the opportunity to resign. If you've determined, another issue is if you determine you need to close the district again, but want to continue paying employees, most of you have your school policies that are going to require you that you'll need to have a board resolution to authorize that. Okay, so moving on to the next. As you know, the Commissioner of Education has been granting waivers regarding annual appraisals for superintendents, educators, principals, and campus administrators. And this is not COVID, I'm sorry. It's just, I think it's allergies. The application process to waive these requirements is available to districts, whether to pursue them is a local decision. I would anticipate that most of your districts have already done that, but if they haven't, they should do it as soon as possible to be certain that it's effective. A lot of you have adopted resolutions that authorize your superintendent to pursue waivers with TEA as necessary due to COVID. And if you've done that, it may be all well and good, but we've noticed that the commissioner has kind of sometimes accepted those resolutions, and sometimes that they have required the board to actually adopt the waivers. So that's something that you would want to consider ratifying those decisions of your superintendent. If you are, like I said, if you haven't adopted a resolution, then the board actually must adopt those waivers and approve those waivers. It's unclear for next year whether waivers are going to be issued for the 2021 school year, but we may need it. Who knows what's going to happen next year? So we do anticipate that you're going to need to be prepared to request waivers as needed in response to COVID-19, and to anticipate that there will be more waivers in place that are going to come down from the education agency. As I said earlier, if your district adopted a resolution authorizing the superintendent to request waivers, we recommend that the board ratify those decisions at a later date. Tony, do you want to add anything?
One point I just want to emphasize that you've already emphasized is at the front end right now, just remind all your staff, all your teachers and employees that we're not exactly sure how next year is going to play out with regard to work days and the calendar and the reality of that. You know, obviously, as Elizabeth mentioned, the sooner you're able to get an idea of what you believe that's going to look like, that's great. But in addition to making sure your contracts are giving you that flexibility with the adjustments that we've recommended that Elizabeth mentioned, but just also just reminding them, everybody that listen, we need everybody to continue to be flexible and understand that, the calendar year and work hours, all that may change. So that's the only point I want to follow up on, but you mentioned it already. So, I think we're good.
One of the things with going back to that point is that, and I thought we talked about that later, but that if you're thinking about starting school earlier or you're changing to a year-round school, it's really difficult to do that at this point in time, because you're either going to have to do it as a district of innovation or formally as to try to convert to a year-round school. And a district of innovation, if you are one of those, that is a possibility. One of the issues that we also have to talk about is the fact that any increase in duty days for contractual employees is not going to be found favorable by your contractual employees unless you include additional pay. And as Tony's going to talk about later, with regard to financial concerns, we don't know where the money's going to come from next year. So, making promises that you can't keep is not something we recommend right now. So it is all in flux, but having a flexibility in those work calendars or any kind of documentation that's provided to your employees with regard to salaries or with regard to duty days is recommended. That it also has that this is anticipated what's going to happen, but we're not sure. Okay, we have to be flexible for the next school year, and that's the message I think we all need to have. Another big change for all of us that work in employment is the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. And that was passed to provide additional leave to families through two types of leave. One is the emergency paid sick leave, and the other one is extended family medical leave. And that also, in addition to creating new types of leave, it also has new types of salary that pay that you're required to provide to employees, which is not included in the Family Medical Leave Act. And as a board member, you want to make sure that you're discussing with the administration, how are we going to apply this? Because right now, this is in policy DEC and DECA, and it's your local policy, DEC and DECA, and those have not been amended, and TASB's even indicated that they don't expect an amendment anytime in the near future. And so the board needs to adopt the FFCRA, and then there's a couple of determinations that administration needs to make in consultation with the board as to whether or not you're going to allow intermittent leave for these, and whether you're going to allow additional paid leave that they may already have accrued. And that's what we call topping off. It's not or making whole above the $200 a day or the 2/3 pay. So those are some issues that the board needs to be aware of when it comes to the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. Okay, the other big change that has nothing to do with COVID, but it's going to be in the 2021 school year, is that the U.S. Department of Education just released their final version of new regulations under Title IX. They're to go into effect on August 14th, 2020. So that applies to your 2021 school year. We are thinking that we're going to get maybe somebody's going to do a restraining order that prevents them going into effect until a later date. But right now, all of the districts need to be ready to go for the 2021 school year with educating their staff with regard to these new regulations, because these are some really very big changes for how we have been doing student investigations as they pertain to sexual harassment. And so the investigations on sexual harassment are under your FFH and sometimes FFI under bullying. But FFH has to do with discrimination, retaliation, and harassment. And these new regulations redefine how you investigate a sexual harassment complaint. It expands the notice requirements so that the notice to any school district employee puts the district on notice of sexual harassment and the need to investigate. And if we don't investigate, we can be found deliberately indifferent, in which case the district can be held responsible. And you know, it's not like there's, you know, that's a very serious allegation without a cap for liability. So we have to be really careful with, if we get notice of a claim of sexual harassment, that we investigate. And right now, the law had been that it had to be a school district employee with authority, but now it's any school district employee. So that means if, you know, the janitor finds out that, you know, or sees something that he shouldn't have seen, that he's going to have the duty to report that to his administrator. And if he doesn't, it doesn't matter. The school district's on the hook. So it adds that requirement as for the investigative process and expands it with a due process considerations. It has to do with how we investigate. There's other additional issues. And so it's very important that we educate administration and that and your student staff. So I recommend that you talk to your district's attorney for specific advice on the details of these new regulations and how can we best put the district in the position for the next school year to be able to investigate any sexual harassment complaints. Okay, there's another thing that we need to talk about. We talked about the fact that, you know, a lot of the districts have, during the COVID response, adopted a resolution that delegated authority to your superintendent. And a lot of those, especially any that I think our firm drafted, we told deadlines within the local policies for things like grievances and investigation, Public Information Act requests, about what a business day looks like. So if you told your deadlines, if you abated the deadlines, if you said we're suspending our deadlines, our business deadlines for either, you know, for a grievance to file a grievance, or for us to respond to a grievance, or for us to respond to a Public Information Act, or for us to respond to investigation, with the schools opening up and you requiring all of your employees to return to work, and some of you are even doing in-person instruction, summer school instruction, it may be preferable for you to look back on that resolution and determine whether or not you need to take actions to restart the local policy timelines. And if your board suspended the business day deadlines, then your board has to go back and say, we're going to, you know, move forward and unsuspend those deadlines. And we're going to try to go back to business more as usual with the new normal that we have up. Also, with the Attorney General's guidance with regard to Public Information Act's requests, the Attorney General stated that that the deadlines for requesting an Attorney General opinion with regard to a Public Information Act request were suspended during the time when you're working on a skeleton crew, when you don't have everybody in place and you can't access documents. So if you can still process public information requests, even if you're not currently open under that definition, we recommend that you do so, so you don't get behind. But we're still waiting on guidance from the Attorney General on that issue. But even if you're not currently open, or if you are open, we recommend that you go back to the normal deadline, which is 10 business days to request a Attorney General opinion if you're going to object to responding to a public information request. And this is the guidance on that. This is what the Attorney General had said. The Attorney General said that days do not count as business days for the Public Information Act if the governmental body has closed its physical offices for purposes of a public health or epidemic response, or if a governmental body is unable to access records on a calendar day, then such day is not a business day, even if staff continues to work remotely or staff is present but involved directly in the public health or epidemic response. Okay, so like I said, if you're requiring employees to return to work, then the exception may no longer apply, and the district needs to respond to the PIA request and to seek legal counsel if you're planning on requesting an Attorney General opinion. Again, we talked about the calendar. So districts should anticipate disruptions during this next school year that are going to result in significant student absentees. So an intersessional calendar may be an option. That's one thing that the commissioner was, recommending, but certainly including longer breaks dispersed throughout the year. TEA recommended 6 weeks of intersessional breaks in addition to the regular calendar that can be used to make up for unexpected closures. It's kind of late in the game to be doing that. I don't know a lot of districts that are adopting new calendars, academic calendars. But if you are going to do it, it's like I had discussed earlier, there's 2 options for school districts to do so. One is under the District of Innovation exemption, and you can amend your DOI, is what we call it, your DOI, and allow for that. Most Districts of Innovation plans already have that you can start school earlier, but some of them don't have that you can end school later. And so that's something that you can work with your legal counsel with regard to amending the District of Innovation plan. And the other one is the year-round system designation. Either option requires board approval and board input. And like I said, it's a little late in the game to be trying to do that for the next school year, but we all know that this is not a normal year. And so if there are drastic measures that are going to have to be taken. So if you need assistance with that, we recommend you discuss with TASB, discuss with TEA, discuss with your legal counsel. Some of these are some things that we've experienced with questions about online learning, and we fully anticipate that online learning will be something that we're going to have to deal with during the 2021 school year. Either intermittently as outbreaks or quarantines come along, or in trying to keep the social distancing guidelines and requirements. It has created some problems with regard to FERPA and confidentiality. And so, you need to make sure your administration's reviewing those. And you might want to ask them, what are we doing to ensure FERPA and confidentiality? The other question that we have comes up a lot is the district allowing recordings of classrooms, and whether such records could be considered as being student records, and how long does the district need to keep those records? A lot of that's covered somewhat in policy, and it is legal to just let you know, it is legal for a teacher to record the entire classroom. It wouldn't be legal just to record one student, but the entire classroom, and allow students to catch up and look at that classroom video later. That is something that does not violate FERPA, but you have to ensure confidentiality, and you do have to review that. A recording could become a student record and therefore protected by FERPA if it is used for disciplinary purposes. So where and how long is a student, or disciplinary or academic reasons, such as you're videotaping a student for a grade. Where and how long is student work being kept is another thing. Who's housing it? Who has access to it? We want to make sure that all of the things that your teachers are generating in their homes that are, student records or district property end up back at this district and is stored and kept at the district. And then, as we said, there might be some issues with local policy deadlines being suspended if, filing the grade to a challenge or a grievance over a grade also has been told. That's another reason why you want to unsuspend those deadlines. Tony, anything you want to add? I'm going pretty fast.
Well, the only thing going back to the Title IX is just to remind everybody that it is a big deal. There's significant changes. it's important for your staff and even the board itself to learn about this. We are providing a 4-part series starting tomorrow with several of the attorneys in our firm. So I encourage you to use us as a resource, or as Elizabeth mentioned, your own general counsel. But there are significant changes that are coming or that are here that we need to be prepared for. But other than that, a lot of the information, Elizabeth, no, you're right on regarding for the school year and online. I believe schools are talking about some type of online part or piece to their instruction, and then also being ready for if there's another surge in this pandemic to be able to quickly pivot and go from classroom to online and then back to classroom, or transitioning in and out. So just be flexible.
And I did want to just interject, sorry to interrupt, but want to remind people that they can ask questions as an attendee on their panel. On their screen, they can just type in a question, and there's so much happening. You all have a wealth of information. And we did get a question after you had addressed the topic and you moved on to a different topic. So I just wanted to give an example of another question, even though it doesn't pertain to in-person learning. And it's about the OMA, Open Meetings Act topic. If the question is, if the majority of the board wants to begin in-person meetings, but 1 or 2 members want to continue virtual, can they still join the meeting via video conferencing?
So if you're saying the majority, if they're deciding that the only way they want to meet is in person, and then 1 board member or 2 they want to do it by video conference, can they force the majority to allow them to do it by video conference? Is that making sure I understand the question?
I'm thinking that's it. I'm just reading the question.
Oh, okay. So that's my understanding of the question. So I would say that I don't think it would be a good idea for the majority to limit any board meetings at this point. I think it's still something that they should be flexible with. However, at the end of the day, the majority is the majority, and if those are the rules that they set, I don't think that may be the best thing to do, because you might have some board members that might be more susceptible to this virus than others. So I think it's probably just good common courtesy and a good way to continue to work as a team, to have those options available for those board members who aren't comfortable or may have been exposed or something like that. But can the majority say, the majority, in Texas and in school boards, the majority does rule. They could, make those decisions if they believe so, but I believe they would have to do it at a meeting and make those decisions. So that's a tough situation, but I would recommend that they have the flexibility for board members who aren't comfortable yet going in person. But that's just.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Tony. We have a few dozen attendees that are very engaged, and so we have another question. Is Zoom a violation of FERPA because it has identifying student information?
And that goes back to what I was talking about. And so, no, Zoom, the classroom itself is not protected, and it's not under FERPA, okay? What's going on in the classroom is not a student record necessarily. It only becomes a student record if the video or a portion of the video or the Zoom meeting was used to discipline a child or as part of an academic record. And that's straight from FERPA. So having the classroom conducted in Zoom is not a violation of FERPA. You have more questions? I was just going to tell you, Vincent, feel free to interrupt us. We'll be glad to stop and answer those questions, because I think a lot of times we learn more from the questions than we do from the actual presentation. So
absolutely, yes. Interrupt, stop us, and we have more questions. Go for it.
Well, you asked for it, you got it. We have one more. Will, and I agree, we want to make sure that we the audience. So I appreciate you all for being flexible, Elizabeth and Tony. Next question, will the changes in Title IX result in changes to policy? And do you know if TASB is working on revising these policies?
They will absolutely end up
Yes.
with in policy. It'll be most predominantly it will be in your policy FFH and FF series. And there are definitive changes that have to be made to what's currently in place. Like I said, there are, wide scope due process that's changed. The notifications change. So I'm sure TASB is working on it, but as I also do, we are anticipating that there may be a restraining order that's going to prevent them from going into effect as quickly. So I'm not sure whether or not they're planning on rolling that out before the start of the new school year. I will tell you that federal law trumps state law trumps policy. So federal law is going to rule here. And so these are federal regulations. And so we have to give them a lot of credence. And so regardless of whether or not your policies change, your districts, until there's some type of a national restraining order that affects Texas, until that goes into effect, we need to be ready to go in August. August 14th?
August 14th, yes.
Yeah, we need to be ready to go by August 14th with the new laws, with implementation of the new laws. Any other questions? Or you ready for me to proceed?
You may proceed. Thank you so much, and I'll check in as we get them. Thank you both.
Okay, great.
Great, thanks.
So let's talk, we talked a little bit about remote instruction, but let's talk about in-person learning for the next school year. The districts, and I know your administrations are working on this, they're trying to figure out campus and classroom configurations, which would allow for social distancing. I know that it has come up with, what are we going to do about busing? And so right now, the CDC, as well as the Texas Department of Health and Human Services, continue to maintain the 6 feet of distance from others outside of your household. So we're kind of looking at that. I've heard a lot of people talking about a half and half scenario where students are doing both in-person construction and online instruction on alternative days to avoid overcrowding. So communications with parents regarding the plans going forward have to allow for flexibility, because we don't know for sure. I think what you need to let them know is our superintendent, as well as all the other superintendents, are struggling to create as many scenarios as possible in order to allow for effective instruction for the coming school year, meaningful instruction for the coming school year. And so, talking to, doing a town hall, a virtual town hall with parents to get parent input on what worked, what didn't work in the past year. I think that would be something that you could consider doing, but we have to all be flexible in this. And I know, parents don't want to go through again what we went through this semester. The good news is we've got a couple months in order to get our ducks in a row to figure out what we're going to do for the next school year. And then we wait to see if it changes because something that comes down from TEA or the governor or the federal government. So one of the things that, another thing that we need to be working on this summer is what are the expectations for next year as far as online learning platforms, as far as what we're expecting. I know I heard from a lot of districts that there were issues with, what student discipline, how do you discipline a child that's doing something remotely? How do we evaluate our staff? We just talked about waivers. We weren't able in a lot of cases to go through with our waivers. with our evaluations for our staff. And so we have to be, think about how are we going to be able to do that next year and be able to do it effectively. I think that it is incredible, and my hat goes off to every single district out there that was able to, in the space of a week, change from everything we knew to teaching kids to going to a full-on online platform. My hat is off to everyone that was able to cope with that, with all of the, the auxiliary staff that provided meals for kids, provided homework to kids. It's really incredible. But for next year, we got to be, better prepared. One of the things that y'all probably also did or considered for this past school year is, what did we do with regard to GPA for the last school year? How did we figure out valedictorian and salutatorian and honors? How did we address the seniors that graduated? Well, in addition to the seniors, we've got another 3 years of kids that were affected by the spring semester of 2020. And so we got to look at that. How are we going to treat that next school year? What are we going to do with the student work that was graded in between that time period? So we need to make sure that complies with that. New technology contracts, which are under your policy CQ, which has to do with your use of technology by district employees, and then there's also a student one as well. Those contracts, that we call them acceptable use forms, those contracts should be reviewed and made ready for the next school year, so that that includes for FERPA protections, that we have FERPA disclosure statements that in there, so that we can protect all of that and also address the issues that we learned about in the prior school year. And I think that takes us over to financial concerns.
So we have a couple more questions. I was waiting for the slides to change in that.
Okay. What are the questions?
And so we have one posted, and then one where someone wants to ask themselves. So the posted question is, how should districts handle social distancing in school buses?
There's not an easy answer to that question. But I've talked to some districts about how are we going to do that? And are we going to get additional monies? Because, we got a bus that's half full of kids, or a third of the way full of kids right now. If it's 25%, a quarter of the way full of kids. How do we handle that? Because we're going to have buses running all day long.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have an answer to that. We don't have an answer to that because we're waiting on the education agency's guidance. So that's why I think it's important for us just to be resolved that when you think about social distancing and the requirements for, capacity, that you're also going to have to implement some online education at the same time, because you can't do it. You effectively, I don't know how you would do it unless you were, small districts, I think, can do it because they might be able to run more buses. It depends on your fleet, your bus fleet. And I know that a lot of districts have invested in technology for the next school year. One of the other things that you got to look at is, should we be investing in school buses? But as we're coming into this next topic of financial concerns, I think you got to wait. Tony, you want to add something?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, it's going to be hard to socially distance all your kids on the bus, but you're going to have to figure out a way to do something like that, whether it's 25%, 50%. I don't know yet. I think those things are being discussed. But yeah, there's going to be more cost involved in probably doing more runs or buying more buses. That's just, it looks like that right now, nothing's going to, there is no vaccine, there is no pandemic going away. The social distancing is going to be important. You have to keep in mind that not only is this social distancing important for the COVID, but flu season's around the corner. So there's going to be a lot of districts and parents that may not want to even send their kids to school on the bus. So like Elizabeth mentioned, you're going to have that flexibility to maybe doing some online or maybe doing more than 1, 2, 3 runs. It's still being discussed, and you're just going to have to be flexible with that, be prepared to deal with those issues. So there is no easy answer, but I can tell you this, it is going to probably be some type of minimizing the capacity in your buses, and it will be a little bit more easier for smaller districts because they have fewer kids than these big, mega districts where, they need every seat on that bus to make sure those kids get there. So it's going to be tough, and there are no easy answers.
Thank you both. We do have a school board trustee who would like to ask his question himself.
Great.
And I'm Royal ISD trustee. Elton Foster, I'm going to unmute your mic. Or if you could unmute. Looks like that didn't work out. So I do see we have one more question that was posted. I'll have to get with Trustee Foster. And it was asking our organization, is this presentation available to us? So the video for all attendees will be on our MASBA website, masbatx.org. And as we can get it up there, and you can see other videos are already up there for you to view. If you're asking specifically about the PowerPoint presentation, that would be a question for you, Elizabeth and Tony, if you'd be willing to share the PowerPoint, and we could send it out to attendees.
If at the end of the email is our I'm sorry, at the end of the presentation is our email address. And so if you copy down our email address and you shoot us an email, we should be able to send you a PowerPoint, a copy of the PowerPoint.
All right, thank you both. You can continue.
Also, in addition to our email address, I think our phone numbers are there. You can contact us afterwards if you have any additional questions, and we'd be happy to help. But yeah, any more questions or at this point?
No, we got 10 minutes, so I know this is some important information coming up.
Okay, so future financial considerations. So this is going to be tough for a lot of districts, as you know, just the circumstances with the economy, with oil and gas, and just unemployment, property values, not this year, but possibly next year, with the legislature going into session and coming up around the corner, with the additional costs of handling these new dynamics with that, like we just talked about with buses and opening up more facilities to allow for more spacing, those kind of things, making sure the facilities are clean, are working, functioning properly, air conditions are filtering properly. There's going to be a lot of maintenance, a lot of ongoing maintenance, a lot of preventative maintenance. In addition to what a lot of districts have already on the books in terms of renovations or new schools or new additions. So we've been working with a lot of districts on looking at figuring out ways that they could maximize the dollars that they have. And right now we've been working with several districts who, because the interest rates, this has been a weird time. We've had some districts who have been out to market to sell their bonds. They're a great district, and then there's no buyers. And we have to postpone the sale because there was some concern early on in terms of what was going to happen. So things have kind of, I'm not going to say they're nowhere near back to normal, but things have settled in the sense that there are investors now willing to buy school district bonds. And I think so it is a good time to meet with your financial advisors, look and see if there's any possible way for any savings in terms of refinancing, or possibly even going out and using some of the other mechanisms that allow you to finance projects through time warrants, tax maintenance notes. Those are other options that your financial advisor can give you some guidance on in terms of, are those maybe better than going out and having a bond election? And that's the tough part, because right now, several districts, well, every district had to put off their bond election that was scheduled in May. And some districts are going to go forward in November, but some are scaling back the amount because of just the reality of finances and the economy right now. And some districts are possibly going to put those off because they're not sure. But it is important for you to look at all that. Call your financial advisor, look at your financial situation, look at your outstanding bonds. Or do you have any that are going to be paid off anytime soon? Do you have any capacity for new bonds? Because you are going to need to maximize your dollars for your maintenance of your facilities, for your buses, because the reality is we're going to have some form or fashion with some kids coming back. Not sure exactly how it's going to work, but you got to be ready. And then the districts that are having a challenge are those that are growing and still need to continue with building the buildings that have already been started. And that's what's kind of on the next part of this slide. You want to be proactive with your contractors, your project managers, and be ahead of the game in terms of looking at what your contracts say with regard to any delay damages. What are the timelines? What are the financial considerations? and how is that going to affect the district? And you know, because contractors have been affected, everybody's been affected in terms of being able to work, in terms of having the manpower, in terms of providing the safe environment. There's things that have to be done. Yes, most of it's outdoors and things of that nature, but it's still a challenging situation. And here we are in the summer, which is getting close to hurricane season. We had some districts that already have hail damage on their roofs, that have damage, leaks coming in. So there's an ongoing, you know, the weather doesn't stop. The need to make sure your buildings are running, operating is just as important now as it's ever been. And there's a cost to that. So be aware of those things. Talk to your financial advisor. Talk to whoever, your director of operations or who's in project managers. Pull those contracts out. Start looking at those delays, damages, and being prepared, and even calling your attorneys just to stay ahead of it. And look at your options and try to figure out ways to maximize the dollars that you do have moving forward. So let's go on to the next slide. Personnel reductions, that's another issue. A lot of districts have been using the policy that allows them to pay premium salaries or for at-will employees, time and a half, and those kind of things, because they're having them come in, helping them feed the kids, the cafeteria workers, helping them do extra cleaning. There was a time where a lot of districts were doing that. But a lot of districts now have put an end to that. They've stopped the premium pay because the school year's ended. We have a better idea of what this pandemic is about in terms of the requirements for how it's spread and what the requirements are to clean. So a lot of districts have stopped that premium pay. However, you know, that at the end of the day, most districts or all districts, their biggest expense is their staff. And with not knowing, not this year, but the following year and moving forward beyond that, what those dollars are going to look like with regard to the state funding, many districts are concerned, and a lot of districts are putting a freeze on hiring, focusing on just the necessary positions, looking at dusting off their reduction in force policies, and just being aware of it, because the reality is that may be something coming down the road. So reduction in force. Every district in their policy has a procedure for how you go forward with a reduction in force. Change in program, reducing staff. A big part of that is performance. How are your employees performing? And are they performing to a level that they need to be documented, be given any growth plans, any reprimands? That's why it's important for your staff to continue to make sure that they are performing. And it is challenging right now because they're having to perform in different ways, you know, distance learning, online learning, but they also need to be making sure that administratively they're communicating with their principals and making sure they're doing the things that need to be done. And it's important that the administration stays on top of that, because if we do start doing reduction in forces, that's a big criteria that we look at, performance. We also look at certifications and tenure and those kind of things, but start thinking about that as well. Let's go ahead and go on to the next slide, because it looks like we're running out of time, and I'm sure we are. And here's the page that has our contact information with our email address and phone numbers. And we're happy to help with other questions, answering other issues, but I'll let Elizabeth follow up on anything there before we close out. Elizabeth?
I don't really have anything else on the topics. I do think that you know, we would be remiss not to say, you know, we don't want to end on a negative note, but we know that it's going to be a struggle next year. And certainly, as Tony has pointed out, for the we're already thinking about the 21-22 school year. So just be ready for that, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. It was a pleasure being here. And
thank you. Yes.
Thank you both so much, Elizabeth and Tony. Unfortunately, we are running low on time, and anybody who didn't get their question answered, every attendee, once this webinar is over, will get a very short evaluation that they can respond to, and I can share your questions and also your emails with attendees' emails with the presenters. So that will happen. We really appreciate both of you, everybody on this who's viewing today, and want to remind you of our last non-Monday webinar, which will be Wednesday at noon, Wednesday, June 10th. MASBA Gold sponsor Edna will present on healthcare in the times of COVID-19, schools, and beyond. So please spread the word and join us next Wednesday at noon. Again, one more time, thank you, Elizabeth and Tony, and all of our viewers. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.